What I'm talking about today is the Tantangara flows, but I'm also going to provide a bit of context as well about, why do these flows from Tantangara Dam exist? So it is part of the Snowy Montane Rivers Increased Flows program. And so I'll cover quite a bit of context about that. Then just give you a quick look at the releases planned for this water year, which will start from May. And then talk about a number of issues, which I'll not point out to you here. I'll cover them as we get onto the next one. In terms of context, so this all comes back to the Snowy scheme, the reason why Tantangara exists, and we have to figure out what amounts we can get allow through of the upper Murrumbidgee. So this is a relief, a plastic relief that was done back in the 50s or 60s. Used to hang on the wall of my dad's shed back in Wagga as I grew up. And I was fascinated by it, all the blue areas of dams, including Tantangara Dam here, and the red tunnels and so on. And this is where, the issues all come from. So I'll just talk about briefly. So the Snowy scheme had two purposes, and that's all written out in flowery language there in the kind of the beige that was on that plastic thing. But basically, number one was to stop the Snowy heading off to sea, and to send its water west and to use that water for irrigation. So that's a great benefit for irrigation, but obviously it meant the Snowy didn't flow to the east anymore past Jindabyne. And the other thing that the Snowy scheme did was it's not just Jindabyne Dam it has to stop that water. It's got a number of other dams in there which are to trap streams up high, their water up high in the mountains, and then redirect that and use the fall of that water to produce power. And that also has impacts. They were kind of seen as okay back in the day, but as time went on, people started to sort of see that the rivers were highly affected. And back in the 90s and into the 2000s, finally there was some work done on that, and it ended up in the Snowy Water Initiative, which has two parts. The first one is Snowy River Increased Flows, and that was to address the first of those purposes of stopping the Snowy heading off to the sea and pushing it west. So Snowy River Increased Flows was to allow some flow of the Snowy towards the sea from Jindabyne. And the other number two there you can see is the Snowy Montane River Increased Flows, which is all about allowing, those streams that were, up high in the mountains and all their water was trapped and sent off to make electricity, to allow some flows below some of those dams. Just quickly, that first part, so part one was all about, and this is again from that relief, you can see here that the Snowy used to flow down from the mountains here and make its way down to the sea near Orbost. The Snowy scheme was all about stopping that water doing that and sending it back west where those little red arrows are showing. But we've ended up with this very feeble river, particularly just below Jindabyne. There was only 1% of the natural flow allowed through. So that idea of the Snowy scheme, the Snowy River Increased Flows, was to allow around 20%, 21% of that flow to come back through. So I'm just going to park that there. It doesn't relate directly to the Murrumbidgee, but you'll often hear about, the Snowy scheme and how that affects Tantangara. There is water returned. That doesn't actually make its way to Murrumbidgee through that part. Snowy River Increased Flows, but there's a second part that does. And it's all to do with this idea of trapping the water up in the higher country, making dams up there and stopping it so it can then be controlled and used through these power stations. I'll direct you over towards Murrumbidgee River here. Basically, this is up above Cooma. We've put in Tantangara Dam, and that's then used to send it off towards the Tumut system and create electricity there. But again, nearly all of the flow was stopped here. There was some small amount of a thing called base passing flow, an amount that allowed some water for Cooma's water supply to continue on. But otherwise, it was effectively stopped. And the other thing you can't see though here is this is showing the major tunnels and the major storages and diversions. There's also Goodra-Digby River, which makes it stopped. The upper part of the Goodra-Digby River is stopped and diverted to go into Tantangara Reservoir as well. So the engineers back in the day were very thorough, if nothing else. Any water that could possibly be redirected and made electricity from it was redirected. That was the sort of Tumut, the northern part of the Tumut-Murrumbidgee northern part of the scheme. The southern part of the scheme includes the Snowy. And what I want to direct your attention to here is each time they have a storage, like this is Guthiga, this is the Snowy River coming in, probably skiing around here. It's stopped here and then diverted through tunnels to make electricity. Now, just below that dam, they've tried to stop effectively everything. So they're going to have a channel with a river channel with effectively no water in it, except maybe a little bit of seepage. Same happens again as the Snowy makes its way down to Island Bend. Again, they stop it, and there's a little bit of seepage. I've got a photo later, and all the rest is directed down to make electricity. And they're better than that. There's actually in between here, there'd be little creeks and stuff like that coming in. They even divert all of those, or as many as they possibly can, and send them off to the dams as well for usage as high up as they can. So that's the Snowy. There's also a G-High, which flows into the Murray eventually, but they stopped that as well. And so just below here, there's no flow in the G-High River directly below that dam. And again, there's little creeks that come in here. They stop as many as they can. So here's one here, stop it. But there's a lot of other little aqueducts and so on that aren't shown. So upper Snowy flows are diverted. So this river, the Snowy below these dams is not having much flow. G-High below these dams is just a bit of seepage as well. So that was what was decided, let's do something about it. So this Snowy Montane River increased flows, which includes the upper Murrumbidgee, was put in place. And it allows some flows below the dams, including Tantangara. If we're looking at one here, I've got a photo on the left, which shows Island Bend on the Snowy. And you can see, these very well rounded rocks that would have a very strong flow coming through and carving all that out. Now is a kind of algae, there's a pool there, which is fairly much still. There's just seepage below that. And that's all you would see in this, rather remarkable big valley, just a sort of a chain of ponds initially until we get a bit more seepage come through. The idea of the Snowy River increased flows was to provide some back. So for things like below G-High or below Island Bend in the Snowy, this is one that comes in. It's called Middle Creek. This is one of those weirs where there was a creek that would come down to, in this case, the G-High, and they would stop it and then direct that off to G-High Dam, so because they could make more electricity from it. So what this Snowy Montane River increased flows is all about is to actually allow that flow through. This will flow down and it actually comes out just below G-High Dam and provides flow there. That's a lot of context, but I now get into where that fits in. So we end up with water allocations for Snowy Montane Rivers, increased flows, and it can be up to 150 gigawatt hours of foregone electricity generation. They could have made electricity out of this, but they're allowing it to flow over. We got to pay for it. And there's a budget that's been put in with this Snowy Water Initiative of up to 150 gigawatt hours of lost electricity or foregone electricity generation. So we need to kind of budget out how much we're going to use of that 150 and spread it between all these different rivers that no longer have flow below their dams or had very little flow. And when I say 150, it's up to, and that means it can be less. So this dot point here, contingent on allocations. So basically all this links back to how much water has been recovered in the Murray and Murrumbidgee system to save water for the Snowy. And then it's linked to the amount that we're going to allow through in those, the G-High, the upper Snowy and the upper Murrumbidgee is all linked to that. In most years, we don't get 150. In fact, it's only happened twice. Since about 2011, since this stuff started. And to give you an idea of how we divvy all this up, we've got all of these you can see on the left hand side, a number of rivers that are dammed for this power generation, and Murrumbidgee River, Digby, and so on. And they all have different conversion factors. I'm not going to get into that too much, but basically the higher up those dams are and the more you can generate from them, the sort of the more the loss is or the foregone generation is. So unfortunately, Murrumbidgee is the most expensive, equal with the Digby, because they're kind of the highest up and have the biggest drop relative to where they eventually go, which for the Tantangara and Digby is down to Blowering. But this is this water year, and I'll just direct you to the fact that we've got 35, nearly 36 gigalitres, that's 36,000 megalitres of water to use this water year. It's the equal up there with the most we've ever had. So we've got that amount of water, and we have to then figure out how we will use it for the year. So I'm not going to go, but we do have objectives, we do speak to experts, use science, etc. But one of the key things we start with is, rather than just try and sort of draw in little blocks and put in particular flows for any particular day, we look at the Murrumbidgee as it naturally was, so that natural inflows into the Murrumbidgee or into Tantangara. So what was the natural Murrumbidgee flow upstream? We pick a year that's similar in terms of, this is a wettish year in terms of the water we've got available. So we pick a wetter year and see, when are the peaks, when are the troughs, how big are they relative to each other, and use that as a kind of a starting point to make sure that we've got that natural variability, seasonality, timing, etc., and rates of rise and fall and so on. And this water year, I'm talking about what have we done. A lot of this I did this year before last, but my colleague Emma Wilson put out a shout out to her, who's on leave at the moment, but she did it this year for the upper Murrumbidgee, the Tantangara flows. So looking to do a number of things. One is to improve the channel condition. So we've got 3 peaks above 1,000 meg a day. So the idea there is that flows from Tantangara were, very, pretty much stopped, not stopped fully, but very much reduced. And that meant the whole channel has changed as, sediment's not able to be flushed out as much. Vegetation can encroach. You end up with a very much choked channel. And we do need some small peaks to help to create that, get rid of that encroachment of vegetation and create a little bit of a actual riverbed and riffles and so on like that, with the expose the cobbles and stuff like that. So there's that, making sure that those cobbles, etc., are cleaned with a variety of smaller peaks as well, and that creates a cleaner substrate for egg laying, particularly for Macquarie perch, which are endangered and in that stretch below Yoyak. We're also looking to make sure that we've got resource availability and productivity for a bunch of biota, including platypus and fish and frogs. So that's for creating wetted habitat, but also making sure that we've got, as flows go up and get into those vegetated side bank areas, they'll bring in some goodies that, various bacteria and so on will break down, and eventually you've got some food for fish, etc. And obviously also to provide flow variability. Now, getting back to the context. So this is the flows we've got for this water year. You'll notice we've got 3 peaks above 1,000, another one, above 900. And these are, like I said, to create that flushing, we can only go up to 1,500. The dam outlet only allows us to get up to 1,500. But we're also providing that variability, which is linked to a previous year. One thing to note, though, is that we don't have enough here to keep on going the full year and provide flow on every single day. And this is a conscious decision, and I'll talk about that a little later. But it is the question between keep it wet or keep it clean, and which is kind of the way we've summarized it down. You can try and use your water and spread it out across every single day of the year, and keep it wet for every single day of the year. But then you lose all these peaks, and you lose a lot of variability, because you're putting water to try and maintain at least some constant water in the section of the river. The decisions that we've been talking with experts and with others in the field is that we're better off trying to at this stage do some peaks in there to keep it clean, provide the flushing of cobbles, etc., for Macquarie perch, and at the moment, we're leaving this out. One of the key reasons of this is that we can't do this. This is the most water we're ever going to get. In dry years, there's no way, even if we just Vegemited it across every single day, we wouldn't have enough water to actually provide a flow. There's a minimum of 30 meg a day that the outlet will allow, and we've tried to spread our water 30 meg a day across every day, we'd run out. So there's no way we can every year provide full flow for that section below Tantangara. So I've started getting into the issues, and I'll finish them off here now by getting more into detail. So I want to now talk about this. So we've got a few issues here. Daily flows are set 12 months in advance. We've got this base passing flow, and it's accounted in a way that's not, to our advantage. Environmental water we do release can be taken for irrigation. The Tantangara releases we've got, and I've just talked about that, are highly variable between years. There's some years we've got not much at all, and another issue is that we need to build our knowledge base to make better decisions, and we're working on that with others. This first thing about the rules, daily flows are set 12 months in advance, and this is a really hamstrung us here and also in the snowy. The water year begins in 1 May and runs through to the end of April. We've already had to set, and you saw that hydrograph which was showing water going up and down over different months of the year. That's been sent through to Snowy Hydro, and it's basically being locked in right now. It's not good in terms of, if you had your druthers, you would say, okay, we'll tell you the general sort of pattern that we're wanting to release. But, what happens if there's, a drier period and it's really dry for a while? We would have actually liked to have maybe had a little bit more in that period. Or, if there was a bushfire and then, a slug of sediment came in, it would be nice to be able to say, well, actually, let's release a high flow now to flush some of that out. We can't do that at the way things are currently set under there's a deed, a legally binding deed that was set up in 2002, which says what we can and can't do. And that really restricts us in this way. Obviously, it's good for Snowy. They've got surety about when their water is going to be available for generation or not. But for us and getting the most use of this very valuable water, it's not ideal. And the only way I could see forward on that is through, there's a Snowy water license review, and in fact, a bigger review potentially of the whole deed. It really gets down to the deed, and this is kind of the fundamentals, and it's very difficult to change this. Unfortunately, it's kind of like the constitution of the Snowy water we've got. We'd have to go right back. That's issue number one. Issue number two is this idea of base passing flows. So I've talked about, not much water would have previously come from below Tantangara. The water that did come is this 32 megalitres a day of base passing flow requirement. So the Snowy Hydro don't have to release anything if the flow at Midigang crossing is 32 meg a day. And there's a number of little tribs that come in below Tantangara, which will provide some flow. And by the time it gets to Midigang, which is where Cooma takes its water supply, there's a requirement for 32 meg a day. Obviously, we need it for water supply there for Cooma. So if it's a very dry year and there's not enough flow at Midigang, Snowy Hydro have to start releasing water from Tantangara to make sure that it does get up to 32 and stay there, and Cooma has his water supply. In a year like the year just gone, which was a very wet one, they didn't have to deliver a single megalitre. Great. In other years, they've had to deliver, something like 7,000 megs. And the problem is that the budget for that is that they've told, again, under this Snowy water deed, it only needs to be an average of 2,000 meg a day. And that's what they have to provide. So if they're providing more than that, they're sort of keeping a tab on it. And we're currently, because of all the drought years that have happened, in the last 10 years, we're running a deficit of many thousands of megalitres. And in theory, Snowy Hydro can come and knock on our door and say, give it back. And this is the problem. It basically, there's been agreement that the extra delivery of this water for base passing flow is to come from our environmental water budget. And, that's obviously a problem for us, given that in some years we don't have much at all. And even in a really good year like this one, we still don't have enough to really do some decent flows and keep the river flowing. So that's the second issue we've got, is us having to pay for some of that base passing flow. Another one is that when we release water, and you can see here that, from Tantangara, we've got the river going down to near Cooma here, Midigang crossing, and then making its way along. And eventually this is the border here into the ACT. There's irrigation take zones. So there's Murrumbidgee 1, which is for people to be able to take water from the river between Tantangara and Midigang crossing, and Murrumbidgee 2, which is for the river in the New South Wales outside the ACT down to Burrinjuck Dam. So the main thing we're worried about here is this section here. We've got this irrigation entitlement there. Murrumbidgee 1 above Midigang, there's some 1,700 more than megalitres a year that can be taken. And there's also a town water supply here at Mittagang Crossing of over 2,000 meg a day. And then below Mittagang, this stretch through to here, there's some 6,500 megs that can be taken in any 1 year. In a year like this one, not a concern. Very wet, there's enough water in the river, they're always going to be able to take. In a dry year, every time we would be pushing water into the river, there's a chance that we're just providing extra water for irrigators to take. And by the time it's kind of gone past the bigger pumps that are around this sort of where the new Morella comes in, we will have lost a good portion of it. There's some rules around take and so on. Once it gets to a certain level, they're not allowed to take anymore. So below 33,000 at Mittagang, they're not allowed to take any more. Below, I think it's 27,000 at Billalingra, they're not allowed to take any more. But anything above, below 27 megalitres a day, at Billalingra, they're not allowed to take any more. But we're delivering in areas above that, and we're potentially providing water that just can get taken on the way. We're still trying to work out how big a problem that is. Obviously, most years they're possibly okay without us because there's a lot of tributaries that come in. But there's going to be periods of the year where it's worse or better for us in terms of the likelihood that water will be taken. And also, there's just a principle that this water is paid for with taxpayers' money. It's meant to be for the environment. It should be protected as such. So we're looking at what ways we can potentially get that protected. Another issue here is this sharing water between rivers means that a lot of the time the Murrumbidgee River ends up with very variable water between years. You'll see that there's a number of rivers here that we're sharing between. Unfortunately, a lot of these are kind of locked in. There's Falls Creek Weir. We can't adjust that. We have to, if we're going to provide water to that, it's all or nothing. And we've set that up for a number of years now, providing water to the Snowy below Guthaga. If we were to shut that off, then we'd dry it up and all that benefits and gains we've made would be lost. So we'd be very loath to just go, yep, we've done it for 10 years or so now, less for that, but for a number of years now, got a little bit less water this coming year, turn it off. Ditto for these other weirs, they're either on or off. The only one that can be adjusted easily in any way is Digby, and it can be brought down to about 7,000 meg a day, or 7 gigs, 7,000 megalitres per year. So if we've got 35, 36, which is an excellent amount compared to normal for the Murrumbidgee in a good year, what do we do in the bad years? Do we want to turn the other ones off completely? Well, generally we don't. So we're left with the only sort of what's our lever in terms of which one can be adjusted down. It tends to be the Murrumbidgee. So that means we end up with very variable water availability in the Murrumbidgee. So we've got, back in 17, 18, we had basically the same amount of water we've got now, but then we went into, drier years and we got right down to 3.4 gigs or 3,400 megs in 2021, following that very dry 2019-20 year. And the only reason we even had that amount was because we scrambled and managed to find a way to reduce down Middle Creek flows. So, we end up with a much reduced amount in those dry years, hence our inability to provide flows. Even if we wanted to Vegemite it out over every day, we couldn't actually provide enough. We'd need about 9,000 or 9 gigs of water in a year to provide flows every day of the year. And we don't have that in a lot of years. What can we do about that? The only way I can see forward without actually turning complete river systems off fully is to lobby and see if we can get some of these unadjustable weirs to have works done so we can adjust them down so that we could, in a dry year, reduce down other weirs to allow some more in the Murrumbidgee. And the only other way was to get more water, which is a very difficult one, but probably worth mentioning as a noble thing to go for. The last point I want to make is that, just go back again, you'll notice here that, managing the fact that we've got very little water here. We've got a 27-kilometre stretch of the Bidgie River that goes from Tantangara down to get to Yoyak Creek, which is the first sort of decent creek to come in. Effectively, it's going to be pretty much ephemeral in those dry years. in that, there's no major trips coming in. The major flow is going to be from Tantangara. If we can't provide flow from Tantangara, then it's likely to be drying up. We just don't have enough allocation to provide every day of the year. So one of the key things is to find out in that 27K stretch, what's happening there. And we know that, if you turn it off on day one, on day two, it's not dry. There are ponds and so on. It does keep wet in various areas. There's some steeper sections that are likely to dry out quicker. But if we can get a better idea of how long it takes to dry up, then we might be able to figure out, well, if you do flow for a week and then we can turn it off, how long, maybe we can have no flows from Tantangara for another 4 or 5 days, bring it back on again and know that it's not actually fully dried out. And in fact, information that we've gotten from Antia, from her sort of citizen science work, is that some of the Murrumbidgee upstream of Yayak Creek actually didn't dry out even during the drought. So there are sections, even when we were stopping flow, there seems to be enough getting through to at least some of this river. So we've set up, and my colleague Emma Wilson set up some cameras to look at that through the year so we can get a better handle on that. We're also looking at, in that stretch above Yayak, what's its usefulness in terms of if we did get it wetted up, how much could we expect the fish to come back into it? And there's a project there which is with the Upper Murrumbidgee catchment network, where we're looking to get some LiDAR and drone work from University of Canberra, doing the work there to figure out where the fish barriers are. Where could the likes of Macquarie perch get to? How valuable would it be to keep water in those sections? There's plenty more, but that'll do.
Wonderful, Paul. There's certainly a lot in this one, and I know there's some real interest in this topic, and there's certainly a number of questions that are in the chat. I reckon there's probably enough in this for a session on this topic itself, and I suspect that we'll have other opportunities this year to explore some of these issues, because there's a lot in the topics that you've raised there, particularly some of these longer term issues and challenges with things like the deed and everything else.